I'm going to share 3 things that allowed David Goggins to go from overweight, spraying mosquitoes for a living, to losing 100 pounds in 3 months, becoming a Navy SEAL, and now the largest motivational influencer in the world. And I'm going to talk about what allowed him to initially make the change and what now allows him to sustain that change over a long period of time, because they're 2 different things. Now, initially, what allowed him to lose 100 pounds in under 3 months, to start Navy SEAL training, that mindset shift was hating where he was in life and just realizing that's not where he wanted to be for the rest of his life. He didn't want to be spraying mosquitoes. He didn't want to be overweight. And so once he realized, okay, this is not it, that's really what gave him the motivation to change. And this is what I call an anti-vision, and it's something you can do super quickly and easily to start off and really jumpstart your own change or overcoming any of your addictive habits. You can simply ask yourself, where would my life end up if I continued down the path that I'm currently on? What would happen if I continued to let these habits get the best of me? If you really think about that, think about the outcome that is going to happen. And now if you really spend some time thinking about that and thinking about all the areas of your life that eventually these habits are going to affect, you start to feel disgusted at that, and that motivates you to start making changes. You can think about this every single day, and whenever you're tempted to engage in your old habits, you can think about that anti-vision. You can have it written down. Now, during this time, David essentially shifted his source of dopamine. So before, he was spiking his dopamine, eating addictive food, and this led to a crash. This is what happens when we engage in highly dopaminergic activities. And because our body and brain is trying to bring that dopamine back up, for a while, it releases a lower amount of dopamine, which leads to less motivation. And while our brain is trying to restore that, we continue to spike it because we want that dopamine, we want to feel good. But this only leads to a further decrease in our baseline level of dopamine. And so essentially, David had to change his source of dopamine from addictive things to things that required effort, including exercise, which was his main source. And the cool thing about things that require effort is, instead of spiking our dopamine, they produce this natural, slower increase that doesn't lead to a crash. And so engaging in these things actually creates more motivation and doesn't mess with our levels of dopamine. Now, dopamine can also be influenced by the way we perceive things. And so David talks a lot about how he was working on his mind, building an iron mind, and creating someone who could endure a lot of pain. And so dopamine is also released as we work towards a goal. And so if we have this mindset, now David had this mindset, his goal was to not be in his comfort zone anymore. His goal was to feel that pain. It was to engage in that exercise that required a lot of effort each day. And so in those moments when he was in a lot of pain, by associating that with, okay, that's where I want to be, this is my goal, that actually also became a source of dopamine for him, just by having that proper mindset. So this is kind of what our dopamine can look like when we engage in something that requires effort. A sort of steady increase. Now, what's allowed David to sustain this level of motivation over such a long period of time is also not going back to these addictive things like the food in his life. David's talked about how he eats whole foods with 1 or 2 ingredients. He's talked about how he doesn't like to go on social media. And so he spends his days really working towards his goals, which are mainly exercising, sometimes writing. And so he's able to sustain this higher level of baseline dopamine, which gives him that consistent motivation. Another thing that's allowed Goggins to maintain this level of motivation over such a long period of time is because he's built up such a high level of willpower. And so I've talked about before how you don't want to rely on willpower to change your habits, because willpower fluctuates and it can decrease as the day goes on, and if you're relying on that, you can find yourself going back to your addictive habits. But willpower can also be a tool when you need it, and you can think of it like a muscle, as the more that you use willpower to do something that you really don't want to do, the stronger your willpower becomes. And there's actually this area in your brain that gets bigger the more that you do things that you don't want to do. He's able to consistently do things that he doesn't want to do because that part of his brain is so strong. Now, obviously, these tools, creating an anti-vision, having a growth mindset, and increasing your willpower are going to be extremely powerful when you're trying to change your habits. But they're not all there is when you're trying to transform your life. And for most people, it's really not going to be enough. Addictive habits can be very controlling, and we can be very dependent on them. And sometimes it's not enough to simply try and have a mindset shift, or try to increase your willpower. Most people will fail if they just try to do those things. And that's where I feel like Goggins, his content can be very inspiring. It's like, this is all you need. Just be disciplined. But I also think this is an area where he misses, because he may not understand that this is not possible for most people. And there's actually a lot of other tools that people can use when trying to change their habits. Now, I've talked about a lot of these different tools in my other videos. Ultimately, these will allow you to get through that period where your brain is very dependent on these dopaminergic activities. And once you're through that period, your baseline level dopamine will increase. You won't feel as tempted to engage in those habits. And so it's okay to rely on different tools and strategies to get through that sort of detox period. And if you're interested in creating a one-on-one game plan for your situation, click the link in the description and I'd be happy to chat with you. And if you want to see more videos like this, then subscribe.